Please do not worry, as we will take over the $3 million inheritance and the apartment buildings left by your father, Cathy, my brother's wife, said, her tone brimming with confidence, or so it appeared. Her smile, aimed at the portrait of my late father, gave off an unsettling vibe. She was clearly mistaken, but I would not reveal this just yet. I would let her believe she was in control for the moment. There was no way I would allow all my father had built to fall into the hands of someone like her. My name is Sarah, and I am 45 years old, unmarried. Hey, Sarah, could you double-check the blueprint that's due tomorrow? Sure, Dad, I answered. At my father's request, I began the final review of the blueprint. I worked at his architectural firm, handling both administrative tasks and design work. From a young age, I admired my father's profession and knew I wanted to follow in his footsteps. I studied architecture and design in high school and college, and after graduating, I joined his company. Over the years, we built the business together. My father had always trusted me, and I was set to take over as the next manager, with the confidence of both him and our employees. I have an older brother, 5 years my senior, who majored in liberal arts. He has no interest in design and, as a result, would have little involvement in the future management of the company. The succession of the business was never a concern for me. The firm, with just 15 employees, was a modest operation that my father had taken over from my grandfather. I planned to continue its legacy and help it grow. Dad, I've finished everything. I'll head home and start dinner. Thank you, and great job today. My father always encouraged our employees to leave on time unless absolutely necessary, and by 6 o'clock that evening, most of the staff had gone home. Only my father and I remained in the office. He often said that a good manager should lead by example, working late when needed, and he did so every day. I admired his dedication, but at 75, I wished he would ease off a bit. I didn't want him overworking himself. When I arrived home, the house was eerily dark. My mother had passed away in an accident when I was in my 20s, and now it was just my father and me. I turned on the light and was about to begin preparing dinner when I heard the door open. Oh, Sarah, you're here? It was Cathy, my brother's wife. I couldn't help but wonder what had brought her over at this late hour. What brings you here so late? I asked, somewhat surprised. I don't care about you. Where's your dad? She shot back, her tone cold and dismissive. There was no warmth in her words. I had long sensed her bitterness toward me, even before she married my brother. Don't rely on your parents and live such a sloppy life. She'd often scolded me. Don't expect us to help you when you get old. I had always managed on my own, never depending on my father, and I had no intention of asking my brother and his wife for any help in my later years. But arguing with her was futile. She never listened. You claim to be independent, but your job is thanks to your father's business. You should start saving for retirement. She continued her usual criticism. It was clear that any conversation with Cathy, who seemed to harbor nothing but disdain for me, was pointless. After speaking with her, I made an effort to avoid her as much as possible. My brother, who had married late in his 40s, still had no children with Cathy. And yet, Cathy had once told me, "You can't even have one child? You're a burden to society." Though that statement could just as easily apply to her, I held my tongue. My brother had explained that Cathy had an illness and couldn't have children, so I avoided the topic out of respect for him. But I still couldn't understand why he had chosen to marry her. My mind was filled with questions, and I couldn't shake my growing distaste for them both. "So when will your dad be home?" Cathy asked, breaking my thoughts. "He'll likely be late tonight. He said he was stopping by the apartment first," I replied. That apartment, passed down from my grandfather, was still a point of pride for my father. Even though we no longer owned it, He took great care in maintaining it, sometimes cleaning and weeding it himself, much to the delight of the residents. Humph, that apartment, Cathy sneered, a sly smile crossing her face. With my father's absence confirmed, Cathy quickly gathered her things and prepared to leave. What did she really want? Make sure to tell your dad I came by to check on him. Don't forget, she instructed before leaving, her eyes scanning the house one last time. Dad, Cathy came over today. I wonder what she wanted, I said, sharing the strange visit with my father. I don't know, she came by before when I was alone, but just sat there, doing nothing, my father replied, his voice tinged with uncertainty. Honestly, I'm glad I wasn't home. Neither of us could figure out what Cathy's intentions were. She was strange, and perhaps her motives were beyond the grasp of us normal folks. But it doesn't bother me much. Dinner was delicious again, Sarah. I'm always so grateful, my father added, sounding unusually thankful. What's with you all of a sudden? This feels a little weird, I joked, and my father smiled shyly. You've become so reliable, Sarah. Maybe it's time for me to retire, he mused, his words catching me off guard. What are you talking about? I still have so much to learn from you, Dad, I replied, trying to ease his concerns. Is that so? Well, I guess I'll take a bath and head to bed. Good night. Good night. A week later, everything changed. My father collapsed suddenly at work. I was in a client meeting when I received the urgent call from a colleague. Sarah, the boss, your father, he's unconscious, he's been rushed to the hospital. I ended the meeting abruptly and rushed to the hospital. I called my brother and immediately reached out to Cathy. My brother promised to come quickly, but Cathy's response was chilling. Do I need to go there? You're already there, right, Sarah? What? Her father-in-law was in critical condition, and this was her reaction? I tried to stay calm and urged her to come. Dad's condition is really serious. You should come at least to say goodbye. You used to visit him often, didn't you? But then came her startling response. Yeah, I only visited to try to get in his good graces, hoping to learn something about the inheritance, Cathy said nonchalantly. I was at a loss for words. I'm not good with hospitals, and if there's a funeral, I need to get my hair and nails done. I don't have time to go to the hospital, Cathy said, her tone dripping with insincerity. Her attitude was so impossibly casual that it took all my strength not to lash out. This woman was simply beyond redemption. Understood. Then, never mind, I managed to say, though my frustration was barely contained. I raised my voice, hoping my anger might at least provoke some kind of self-reflection, even a tiny bit, but her response came back cold and dismissive. Contact me after he passes away. I'm busy too, she said flatly. Her lack of empathy, her dismissive attitude, only fueled my fury. How could she be so callous? The idea that someone could be legally recognized as family, as a sister, and yet behave this way, it was unbearable. 2 hours after that call, my father passed away peacefully. He was 75. The whirlwind of arrangements for the wake and funeral began almost immediately. There was no time for anyone to grieve properly amidst all the preparations. But even in this moment of loss, my brother, the supposed chief mourner, seemed detached. Sarah, did Dad have any special illness? His passing was so sudden. What exactly does the chief mourner do? Do you know? Wait, I have to give a speech. That's such a hassle. At 50, my brother was failing miserably in his role, and his remarks only made my anger grow. But what was even more astonishing was Cathy's attitude. Why should I, as the wife of the eldest son, have to step forward? I hate troublesome things. You do it, she said dismissively before disappearing into the back of the house. Meanwhile, I was rushing around, greeting attendees, meeting with the funeral home, coordinating with the company. It was overwhelming. But Cathy's indifference, her blatant refusal to help, was unbearable. I could almost understand her reluctance to be involved, since he wasn't her parent, but to act like this? It was inexcusable. My anger quickly turned into deep sadness. Well, Cathy has her own difficulties too. Sarah, please handle her part as well, my brother said, as though that somehow justified her behavior. He always took her side. Did he even know the hurtful things his wife had said? The words nearly escaped my lips, but I realized it would be pointless. My brother would never see the truth. So, I chose to ignore them both and focus on what needed to be done. With the help of other relatives, we managed to arrange the funeral without further incident. It wasn't until the first 7 days of mourning that things became even more unbearable. The relatives gathered again, sharing drinks and memories. He passed away without suffering, so he must be content now, said my father's younger sister, my aunt, who was 15 years his junior. To me, my aunt had always been more like a sister. We'd confide in each other, despite the age gap. As we shared a quiet moment, Cathy suddenly appeared before us, exuding the unmistakable presence of a villain from a drama. If this had been a television show, even a casual viewer would have immediately recognized her as the antagonist. Shall we get started? Cathy's voice was full of expectation, as if she were about to dive into something critical. What are you starting? I asked, tilting my head in confusion, unsure of her intent. It's about inheritance. My husband is the eldest son, so the $3 million inheritance and that apartment are rightfully ours. I checked the bank book the other day. Cathy's words hung in the air like an unwelcome thunderclap. My aunt and I exchanged stunned glances. How could Cathy have checked the bank book? It was locked away in the deepest corner of a safe, something only my father had access to. The very idea of Cathy, who had no legal claim yet, snooping around in private matters was beyond unsettling. We were left speechless. Cathy, apparently unaware of our shock, carried on, her tone full of self-assurance. You have the company and this house, don't you? What more could you want? She added, her words almost accusing. Before I could explain, she kept pressing forward, her determination unshaken. Beside her, my brother didn't seem interested. He merely sipped his drink, lost in his own thoughts, indifferent to the mess Cathy was creating. Maybe I'll raise the apartment rent a bit. If the rental income increases, our life will be easier. Or maybe we could rebuild it. Your dad really left us a valuable inheritance, she said, her voice loud enough to echo through the room. Her words were met with an uncomfortable silence. The relatives, caught off guard, exchanged looks and lowered their heads. One person couldn't hold back a laugh, and soon, others followed suit. Some covered their faces with handkerchiefs, trying to stifle their amusement at Cathy's audacity. My aunt leaned toward me, whispering with a smirk, "Is she joking? If you have something to say, speak up." Cathy snapped, her arms crossed, her gaze directed at my aunt. Her tone was imperious, as if daring anyone to challenge her. My aunt and I exchanged wry smiles, unsure of how to respond to this absurd display. Taking a deep breath, I decided to step in and clear the confusion. Cathy, there is no inheritance left for my brother to receive. Cathy's face twisted with disbelief. What do you mean? There's no way. There's nothing. Are you trying to trick me? Her confident expression faltered, replaced by anger. I remained calm, explaining the situation. The circumstances are different. The apartment belongs to my aunt, and I have taken over the company. The inheritance from Dad has already been passed on completely, so there is nothing left for my brother to inherit now. What? That's news to me. I haven't been informed of anything at all, Cathy said, her voice rising. Since this had been arranged long before my brother married Cathy, it was understandable that she had no knowledge of it. I continued, trying to explain the details as clearly as possible. Here's the situation. It was only natural for my father to want to pass the company to me after years of working with him. At first, I resisted, as it was a huge responsibility, but it was very important to him. He had a strong desire to pass the business on to his own flesh and blood. When I agreed to take over, we went through all the proper legal procedures for inheritance with a lawyer. As for the apartment, it was a lifetime gift from Dad to my aunt and uncle, something he decided when Grandpa passed away. Everything regarding the company has been settled, and my brother agreed when it was decided that I would take over. Finally, the ownership of this family home has also been transferred to my name, so there is really nothing left for my brother to inherit now. As I carefully laid out the situation, my brother seemed to recall something and interrupted. Now I remember. Dad gave me a substantial amount of money as a lifetime gift or something. Was that what it was? I got a lot of money all at once and just spent it without much thought. Ahaha. I couldn't help but feel a pang of frustration as I remembered his lavish spending habits. My brother had lived a life of excess, traveling abroad multiple times a year, upgrading his brand preferences, and even switching cars several times. The money he had received had vanished into all those fleeting indulgences. So the apartment is in Andy's name? I always thought. Cathy began, her voice trailing off as she processed the new information. I would inherit it. My brother must have relayed some mistaken information to Cathy without fully understanding the reality of the situation. He had received nearly $1 million as a lifetime gift from Dad but had spent almost all of it without much thought. This was something I had no trouble imagining. So what about the bank book with the $3 million in it? Cathy asked, her tone now laced with suspicion. That's an old bank book from the company that's no longer in use. I replied calmly, but why do you ask? It should have been stored in the safe. That old safe. Perhaps it had been opened with a thin tool of some sort. If so, that would be quite a feat, my aunt remarked, her gaze fixed on Cathy, a frown pulling at her lips. At that moment, my brother murmured quietly, his voice tinged with confusion and hurt. Did Dad hate me? I let out an exasperated sigh, unable to contain my frustration at his unexpected remark. Because it's just Sarah who gets the special treatment. I've already spent all my money and I have none left. You'll have the house and the company. His childish outburst took me by surprise, but my aunt was quicker to respond. She stood up, her expression stern. You're an adult now. Why would you say such things? Do you know how hard Sarah worked to take over the company? Auntie understood the struggles I had faced. She knew that my decision to take over the company wasn't made lightly, and she spoke in my defense. For that reason, the financial hardship you're facing is the result of your own actions. It's only natural that your money would run out if you lived so lavishly. I could almost hear Dad's voice in my head, recounting how often he had expressed his concerns about my brother's extravagant lifestyle. Perhaps giving him that cash had been a mistake. If he kept up with his wastefulness, bankruptcy was inevitable. I shared those same worries. My brother had spent the lifetime gift from Dad within just a few years, never thinking ahead. Now, in a way, it felt like a lesson from Dad. Enjoy luxury from the fruits of your own labor, not from unexpected money. My words made my brother hang his head, but Cathy wasn't convinced. I've never heard of anything like that. Why am I the only one who doesn't know? I can't believe the apartment wasn't his anymore. I sighed, trying to remain patient. That's because it happened before you came into the family. I explained. I'm the wife of the eldest son, and I wasn't informed at all. Dad didn't teach me anything. This is strange. Watching Cathy's outburst, it became clear that my father had never shared the inheritance details with her. But I could understand why. Dad had probably seen through Cathy's greedy nature from the start. She had always been overly concerned with money. There's nothing strange about this. It's Dad's will, I said, my tone steady, trying to calm the situation. But Cathy was having none of it. Her eyes widened in disbelief, and she raised her voice. I won't accept this. I'll sue you. But you're not even in a position to inherit anything, so I don't think you have any right to reclaim anything here, I countered, calmly but firmly. At this point, Cathy's fury reached a breaking point. She knocked over a vase, one that had been a keepsake from our mother, and shattered the glasses on the table. Her rampage seemed almost out of control, as she screamed incoherently. What was supposed to be a quiet gathering to honor my father quickly turned into an unexpected uproar. My brother and other relatives stepped in to try and calm Cathy down, but the damage had already been done. The gathering ended in a tense, awkward silence, the earlier warmth completely replaced by an unsettling tension. It was clear that Cathy's storm had shaken more than just a few objects. It had disrupted the fragile peace that had remained after my father's passing. Cathy, I'll send you the bill for the broken vase and glasses later. You can't just wreck someone's house, I said. Shut up, you money-hungry person, Cathy yelled, storming out with my brother following her. Honestly, if anyone was after money, it was Cathy. It was shocking how money could change a person so much. That day, I fully realized how ugly Cathy's true nature was. In the end, my brother and Cathy divorced. To my surprise, it was my brother who initiated it, despite always being indecisive. After seeing her obsession with money, he got scared to stay with her. He looked pale and seemed to realize he had nothing left and wondered what would have happened if he'd stayed with her. Cathy, a housewife, had claimed she couldn't survive without him. But then we found out something shocking. Cathy had a criminal record for marriage fraud before she married my brother. Once I brought this up with the lawyer and filed for divorce, she surprisingly agreed to it without much resistance. I was shocked, but considering how fixated she was on money, maybe it shouldn't have been a surprise. Honestly, I felt relieved that the family ties with Cathy were cut off, but I couldn't help worrying about my brother's poor judgment. As his sister, I felt concerned for him. Sarah, boss, you have a visitor, an employee called out. I stood up at the call. There's no need to call me boss yet. I still feel a bit uncomfortable with the title, but I know the responsibility I have to protect this company and all of you. The CEO is the boss, right, boss? We're all looking forward to the next payday, another employee joked. I smiled at their humor. You all really love your jokes. I'm happy to be recognized as their leader, I said with a smile. Dad, I promise I will protect this company, I thought, my resolve strong. With that, I handed my business card, printed with President and CEO, to the visitor.